it is.
Okay. I feel round two. We love you, buddy. Have a great day. We miss you, though. We wish you were here.
No, I'm not. We're almost
Everyone can take their seats, please. All right, it's my pleasure to introduce Connor Deacon. He's legal counsel for the Diocese of Kalamazoo. He's our second presenter today on the topic of liability issues that would be good for deacons to be aware of.
Thank you for having me, Deacon. Thank you for having me. I took over for Ian Kennedy, who made the choice to go work for one of his other clients last year. I keep asking him if he wants to come back and go work for the diocese. He says he's good. I don't understand why. I've been doing this for about a year. Thankfully, I haven't had any issues with deacons, but there's never a shortage of work. As Monsignor Osborne says, you can't fix stupid. People do stupid things. So, but it really is a pleasure for me to be here, and I just want to explain what I think of how I conceive of my role. I really see my role as being helping the church, helping the bishop, helping the diocese bring people to Christ, get the legal barriers out of the way, get the bureaucracy out of the way as much as I can, so you can live out the mission of the church. As I was preparing for this, I looked at that last line of canon law, which talks about the salvation of souls always needing to be the supreme law of the church. It has to be kept before one's eyes, and I try to keep that in front of my eyes. Sometimes when we are putting up barriers to things you want to do, it can seem like we're not putting that in front of our eyes. And I hope you know that I try to approach things from that perspective, but it's not always. There are things, and we've seen over time, we've seen parishes that have had issues. So, for instance, some of you may get involved in this in the parishes you help out with. I certainly have had conversations with deacons for dealing with contracts for building projects and things like that. Sometimes it can seem as if we're throwing up a lot of red tape when it comes to signing those contracts, putting provisions in the contracts that we think are just sort of pointless. Like, we know these guys. These guys are in our parish. They're good guys. We don't doubt that. We've just seen things with good guys go bad, and then we try to put the maximum amount of protections in those contracts for the parish and for the diocese, and because everything really falls back on the diocese, that's why we do it. And we try to work with you. We understand that we can't always put the 30,000 provisions in. You have these delicate relationships with people on the ground in your parishes. But there is a reason that we're doing that. It's not just to pad our bills or anything like that. It's because we've seen things go bad, and we want to protect. We want to protect the patrimony of the church, protect the hard-earned donations that the church has received to bring Christ to people. So another piece I would say with that is that I think. Unfortunately, attorneys sometimes are a little bit like insurance agents in the sense that we're always looking at risk and the risk that you might face going down a certain path. And I think there's always a tension between that and sort of the boldness that needs to be present in proclaiming the gospel. So I hope if we have to interact and you think that we're being too risk averse, that you will feel comfortable at least pushing back and just raising that as a question. Why are you doing this? I think it's hampering our ability to bring Christ to people, because we do need to keep that at the forefront. The other thing, and this comes as no surprise to you, we really are in a new era. I think since 2002, the church does not get the benefit of the doubt, And that's one of the ways I approach things when it comes to anything dealing with an accusation, a potential accusation of sexual abuse or anything like that, that we simply don't have any credibility in the public square because of things that were done wrong in the past. So sometimes it seems like we're erring way on the side of caution, but I think that's one of the ways we sort of move forward and have credibility and transparency with people. So those are sort of the things I would say at the beginning. And some of you may be lawyers, but I just want to kind of lay out general negligence principles, and so you can understand the various ways that people who are employed by the church or are working for the church or agents of the church can incur liability. Negligence simply is conduct that falls below the standard established by law for the protections of others against harm. So you think of in the context of a doctor who has certain duties of care with respect to his patients. If he falls below that duty or she falls below that duty and causes an injury that causes damages, that person can be held liable in the civil courts for negligence. So negligence really has four factors, four elements we say in the law. A duty to perform at a certain standard, a breach of that duty, a failure to sort of fulfill that duty, and then the breach approximately causes the injury, and then there actually has to be damage. So it could be that you did fall below the duty of care, but it had nothing to do with the actual injury or damage that someone suffered. Where negligence sort of comes in your role as deacons and also employees of the diocese is what we call vicarious liability or respondeat superior. So the diocese can be liable, vicariously liable for your actions in certain cases. And so if we step back and just think about and I'm sorry, it's just the example that comes to mind so easily, the sexual abuse scandal. Typically the church wasn't, if the church was being sued, it wasn't being sued or being held liable vicariously. It was being held liable because it was negligent, because it was reshuffling priests to different places. It was negligent in its supervision of people. Vicarious liability is actually fairly difficult to pin on a superior because an employer, for instance, an employer-employee relationship, or what there are also principal-agent relationships. An employer is only vicariously liable for the tortious conduct that an employee commits while acting within the scope of employment. So if someone goes off the reservation and does something that's totally outside the bounds of what he or she is supposed to be doing, the employer isn't necessarily going to be liable. So you're generally not liable. An employer is generally not liable for those intentional torts, those intentional wrongs, negligent wrongs that an employee does. An exception would be, and we had this actually, I do some work for the Diocese of Grand Rapids. They tried to pin, you probably heard about the Tudor sex case at Catholic Central. They tried to make the Diocese of Grand Rapids vicariously liable for her actions with respect to a student. The problem for the plaintiffs in that case is that the diocese had no knowledge of her propensity to do this. In fact, she had a clean criminal background. There never have been any allegations that she did this previously. So that's a place where they, and I guess one thing to step back, one reason if someone does something, if someone who's employed by the diocese or an agent of the diocese does something stupid, why are they going to go after the diocese? It's got the deep pockets, it's got the insurance that it can help pay. I mean, certainly there's a question of were they responsible, but it's also, that's where the money is. But in this case in Grand Rapids, the trial court said, no, I mean, you had no knowledge of any of these things. You can't be vicariously liable. And the reason that's important for you as deacons is and I'm going to read some stuff from the Archdiocese of Cincinnati's handbook on deacons, is that the diocese is not going to defend you if you do something outside the scope of your role as a deacon. That's where you could find yourself in danger. Now, I don't expect anyone in this room to do that, but that's one of the. I almost feel like this is a talk where I try to scare people straight, just to give people the worst case scenario, and then you can relax and just do your ministry. But that's partly why I'm here, just to scare you. So with the Archdiocese, you can be put on the hook for things that the diocese won't defend you on. So this is the way the diocese, or the Archdiocese of Cincinnati's Permanent Deacon Handbook puts it. Clergy in the Archdiocese of Cincinnati are covered by the Archdiocesan liability insurance while they are acting within the scope of their position only. It is strongly recommended that deacons obtain a liability rider on their current homeowner's insurance policy. The Archdiocese covers all clergy if they are sued as a result of an injury which someone incurs during a program they are involved in as part of their ministry in which there is an allegation of negligence. You're out with the youth group and an accident occurs out on the ball field or something. That's the sort of thing that the diocese is going to protect you in. It's when you go off the reservation that a diocese won't protect you. And one of the things the Archdiocese says here is that it's responsible for protecting itself.
How is the rider on your homeowner's insurance going to help?
How
How is the rider on the homeowner's insurance going to help you?
you could get a rider on your insurance that basically would, like an umbrella policy or something that would protect you if you were sued for some negligence. You'd have to talk to your insurance carrier. I know right now I just moved homes, and one of the things that was offered to us with respect to the new homeowners policy was an umbrella policy that basically covers us. If my car insurance only went up to a certain amount, the umbrella would protect me beyond that. So you'd have to look at the exclusions, but there certainly are ways that you can contract with an insurance company that would protect you against negligent actions. I would just talk to your insurance agent on that and say, I don't think they're very expensive. I know oftentimes lawyers they recommend that we have professional insurance through our firm. We have car insurance, but they say think about an umbrella policy because it would just be helpful for you if you get hit with a lawsuit that these other things simply won't cover. So, would you have questions?
Well, I do have an umbrella policy, but does the intricacies of that policy vary by carrier?
They probably do. You'd have to look at the exclusions, and having done work for insurance carriers, I know that they often like to throw a lot of things in there that will protect them. So you'd want to look at that. As I'm talking here, I'm realizing that a lot of this is just all about risk shifting, and so which to me is so counter to what your ministry of service. So,
and I guess that's So the diocese takes care of themselves. The insurance company takes. So it's really the person that did it if they don't have the insurance, or even if they do, if they don't have the deep pockets, they're just kind of on the hook for it. Regardless, because that was covered in the past.
Yeah. But to respond, your ass is covered when you're within the scope of what you're doing. So again, if you're out with the youth group,
right.
and there's a car accident, right. And there's now a suit later that you were negligent in the way you were driving, that's the sort of thing that the diocese would cover, because that's what you were within the scope of your ministry. You're out there, and so other things like that. It's an example might be like if you don't have a counseling degree and you start counseling and end up in some sort of situation where someone relies on your advice and maybe tries to commit suicide. I mean, I'm just thinking off the top of my head, but it's really those things where you're going beyond what really what your vocation is and what your mission is. Yeah.
Well, maybe I'm early, if so, tell me, but you're speaking how the church will represent me. How will the church represent me in the issue of confidentiality?
Yeah, well, we're going to talk about that a little, and that, I think it's complicated for deacons because you don't have the seal of the confessional, but you may have things that, and this is something I think we'd want to talk to maybe Monsignor Osborne or others about the internal form. To what extent are things confided to deacons that we would consider part of the internal form that are not shareable? And that's kind of a gray area, unfortunately, because it's very clear when you have the seal of confession, and I think, and I'll talk about it later, but one of the things, like if you're making medical visits, for instance, you're not covered by HIPAA, which we all know about HIPAA, the privacy concerns, but the congregants you're visiting and the parishioners you're visiting and the hospital might think you are. And so I think one of the good things to do is to try to just explain where the limits are of your, I may not be able to keep everything confidential. So I think part of it is an ounce of prevention aspect of it, just trying to explain to people, these are, as a deacon, I don't have the same, that necessarily have the same sort of lock on confidences that you give me. And one of the places, and we'll talk about this, that comes up is being a mandatory reporter under the Child Safety Act of Michigan. Because the seal of confessions is an exception where if you learn something, if a priest learns something in the seal of confession, believes someone was being abused, that's not something that he can't, obviously under church teaching can't reveal, but also there's a protection in civil law for that. And there's a sort of catch-all that I'll read the language later about confidences. And I think part of it's a gray area in the law. That's one place that it hasn't been tested all that much. So,
Has it?
What was that?
Has it been tested?
It has not been tested. At least as far as I know, I haven't seen cases that deal with sort of deep. I'm sure it's happened in other denominations where they probably tested, well, was that a confidence that this clergy person was bound to and couldn't reveal anything else. But it really is one of those things where the next instance could be the test case, unfortunately. So.
Well, it's been 19 years for me, and I have heard confessions. I'm sure you guys have too.
Yeah.
Ours, 36 years.
Yeah.
So we've heard things that we just can't forget.
Yeah.
I've even had one say, "I'll tell you, but I can't tell Father. Don't tell Father."
Yeah. Yeah.
Can you mention HIPAA too later? Because
Yeah.
I'm into that.
Yeah.
You don't know.
Yeah, no, I'm going to get into that later. No, and that's, and I guess from my own personal perspective, if I were faced with, if you called me up, I would want to try to put the maximum amount of protection on confidences that are given to you. That's just to serve the church and to protect the church. I think I would want to fight for that, but I think that's one area where some clarification from a canonist would be helpful too, because it is a gray area, and the civil law may not recognize it, but you may feel bound to keep it. And and that's one of those places where the civil law and your duty as a deacon may come into conflict. And that's knowing the bishop, knowing people here, I think that they would probably want to fight on your behalf for that. I certainly would. But it is a gray area. I wish it were clear, but it's not. So yeah.
So as deacons, we have people come to us and talk about a lot of different things.
Yeah.
And sometimes it can have to do with them or a family member or something like that. Mental capability, whether they're bipolar or schizophrenic or a lot of different things. But in this one instance, I just said, I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist.
Yeah.
So, but they come, the people who come and they'll ask us questions. So I think sometimes is it makes sense that we kind of put a disclaimer out there.
Yes, very much
that,
so.
You know, I'm not necessarily qualified in that area.
Yes.
But we can, you know, try to guide them to some place where they can get help. But it's like Mike says, though, if they come to you, and especially if they're talking about mental illness or something with somebody in the family, they don't want that to get out.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I can't, I mean, it's hard to conceive of the legal ways that would come. I mean, I guess a lawsuit or something that might come out at some point, but the disclaimer part, I think, is absolutely a good way of beginning it. Say, I'm not a counselor. I'm here to minister to you as a deacon of the church, a ministry of service. And I will listen, and I will keep these things confidential to the extent possible. I mean, and the only place I really see the conflict coming up is if someone tells you something and you suspect that there's child abuse or neglect. I think that's really, because you are, and we'll get into this, you're a member of the clergy and you're a mandatory reporter. So that you have to report those things. I mean, at least the law would say that, and if you fail to report it, you could face both criminal and civil liability.
Elder abuse too.
Elder abuse, I have to go back and look at the statute, because I have looked at this because we had a report last year where there was potential. I have to look at that more closely, and I can get back. I'll send an email to Deacon Haas and get that information out to you. I don't know that you're a mandatory reporter for that, but you may be. But I appreciate that question. Yeah.
So I'm a social worker for the state. I were in the deacon role, and I felt there was some suspicion of abuse. I would feel obligated to call in. But I guess would I notify somebody other than pastor?
Yeah.
I wouldn't beyond that. But
You know, I think it's always helpful to call me in those situations, and I can tell you in the last year we had, and again, I err on the side of caution on these things, I really do. We had an incident where an employee of the diocese was in a classroom with some kids, was demonstrating some differences in cultural differenses, and I never went anywhere, but I had no belief that it had anything sexual in nature, but he tapped some of these fourth graders on the buns. My recommendation was, I actually made the call to CPS. I didn't think we were required to, but I also was worried about what would happen if the parents who were going to be informed that this has happened asked, what did you do about this? And so we erred on the side of caution and did report that. And that's typically my approach to those things, because there's immunity for sharing those things with Child Protective Services. It's confidential, and I think they're pretty, and you would probably know better than I, but I think they're pretty good at discerning the line between something that's just maybe thoughtless and what's real abuse. But those are not easy situations. Another thing you may run into, it's come up now twice in the last month. I don't know how many of you have ministries in schools, but sexting, the texting of sexual pictures is a huge issue, and that certainly should be reported to the police, but also sometimes that can be something that needs to be reported to CPS as well. And I guess it makes me think about I think so much of this, if you just apply common sense, you'll probably stay out of trouble 99.9% of the times. And just use and just live the virtues that you know from the catechism and from the church teaching.
So are you suggesting that notes be kept? I mean, this is a lot of what you're discussing are personal conversation.
No, sorry, what? No.
Just in going back and recalling, or did you say this, or how was this said, or it's just.
No, I'm not suggesting no. I'm just saying that when you're entering into, if someone comes to you and is going to tell you information about mental illness in the family, just making it clear to them verbally that I'm not a counselor. And yeah, no, I'm not saying that.
And that carries weight, I guess, if it's unprovable. Is their word versus your word? I mean, is that?
Well, I mean, it would be your word. I mean, but it's a level of protection that's not present if you don't do it. I mean, it's sort of trying to set clear, at least verbal boundaries. I start to get nervous thinking about it, and I probably would too if in your ministries you start to take notes on things. I mean, I think that's going to make the people you're ministering to nervous. I certainly hope that. Monsignor Osborne is over the confessional right now. I know he's not taking notes.
He's a dictaphone.
Yeah.
That's all right.
I did call him once and he texted me saying I'm about to hear confession, so let me know of any juicy ones. So, yeah. So, yeah.
It seems to me that anybody looking at a potential, interaction would say, well, didn't you tell this person that you can't do what they're asking? I mean, there might be some belief that, hey, we have some common sense that lets somebody know I can't do that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's what I'm getting. I mean, I just, so when I'm talking about common sense, I'm thinking just the basic, I think Ed talked about this, just the basic norms of charity. I mean, treating people with a goal. I mean, so much of this is the wisdom of the church, I think, just keeps you out of these issues, but also just letting people know, look, there are limits to who I am and what I can do. And I just wanted to, this is from the Deacon Digest in January of 2009, that kind of goes back to the archdiocesan principle. A deacon, depending on the circumstances, may or may not be aided by the legal counsel for a diocese whose prime responsibility is to protect the interests of the diocese itself. In tortious or criminal cases involving clerics, the diocese has a duty to protect itself first. The cleric's fate is often solely his own to rescue with whatever legal talent he can afford. That's a little freaky. Again, though, that's not going off the reservation. I don't want you to say, if the takeaway that you have today is, oh my gosh, the diocese doesn't have my back, that's the wrong takeaway, because that's not what we're saying. It's just trying to impress upon you that when you go outside sort of your lanes of authority, then that's where you can get into trouble. And again, the common sense can be, is very helpful, I think, for that. As you probably know, especially those who've been serving, was it 36 years? I mean, the diocese is self-insured up to $1 million for things like car accidents, things like slip and falls. So if you have any responsibilities around the parish grounds and you fail to tend or care to something that created an incident, that's the sort of thing that the diocese has insurance for. And then beyond that, the Michigan Catholic Conference provides insurance. I want to talk about, I have like 5 areas of risk that I see, maybe 6. I had 4 in the original presentation, but as I was thinking about it and driving here, I thought of a few more. The areas of risk that I've seen, and again, I'm 1 year into this and talking to others, so there may be others, but one is the mandatory reporting of abuse. I mean, and I think, especially with what we've seen come out of Michigan State in the last year, this is very much on people's radar, and so this is one place where we have to be very careful, and I'll get into that. The second area of risk, and again, this may only have an effect on some of you because I don't know what your roles are in parishes, but just the maintenance of parish facilities. Just keeping it, if you have any role in maintaining parish facilities, keeping an eye out for things that are, and I can send to the group that the Michigan Catholic Conference actually has a PowerPoint, and it has photos of things that are warning signs around parishes. They have a photo of a door that's got a padlock on it, from the inside. Those sorts of things. Like if you had because you can help the diocese avoid liability. It's not just you. It's helping to protect the church so the church can do its mission. So if you have those sorts of duties, I think parish facilities, and also sometimes you'll be tasked with some of the administrative things like setting up special events. If a local group is going to rent the parish hall for the night, being aware of the requirements we have for that. Another area I've already hinted at is just medical care. And many of you are going to be administering nursing homes, hospitals. understanding that you are not bound by HIPAA, the same sort of regulations that doctors and nurses are, but the people that you're ministering to may think you are. And so that's one of the places where just sort of, if the patient is conscious and able to understand, just trying to set out for them. Here's sort of the limits.
But shouldn't we just automatically take that into consideration, that we're not to repeat who we saw in the hospital?
Yes, I think
that's a privacy issue that we should be able to adhere to.
I totally agree, but sometimes there are going to be incidents where maybe the family wants, members of the family are going to say, can you make sure people know so that we can pray? And the patient might not want it to know. So I think it's just trying to set expectations for the patient, just that I'm going to use common sense and keep a close hold on this, but I don't want you to think that I'm...
Because sometimes if we say something to somebody, then, I mean, news travels fast, and then the next thing you know, they've got 10 people in their hospital room where they didn't want anyone in there.
Right.
They didn't want visitors.
Yeah.
And then they say, well, how'd you hear? Well, the deacon.
Right.
He talks a lot.
Yeah.
I'm like, man,
Yeah.
bad news.
Well, I'm a volunteer at Fortis,
Okay.
and I am bound by the HIPAA regulations. But like, if I run into a parishioner, I'll say, may we add you to the prayer list?
Yeah.
You know, that kind of thing.
I think that's a good way to, I think it's a good way to approach it.
Or can I mention this?
Yeah. No, very much. I'm sorry, I'm just thinking of an example. My brother-in-law is an OBGYN, and he actually delivered a friend of mine's baby. She gave him permission to tell me that she delivered the babies. But that's the kind of, but I think that's a good approach. And I think, and I'm sorry, I like the Notre Dame, I don't know your name though.
Louis.
Deacon Louis. I think erring on the side of privacy and confidentiality is the way to go. I mean, that's the easiest way to sort of avoid issues.
I had an instance where someone called in the parish office and said to go to this one nursing home because her sister was there and needed to talk, wanted to see somebody. Well, when I get there, the sister knew nothing about it. She was non-responsive to anything I was saying, and it's like, so what I did was I went back and I told the receptionist, when you get calls like this, you make sure that it is the wishes of that person that we're supposed to go see, that they want to be seen, and not the wishes of somebody that's like, oh, this is their last chance, that they can, be reconciled to the church.
Right. Yeah.
So the filter that we have through the front office desk, it makes a big difference.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's a bit of a tension there, right? Because even if you end up there, the person didn't know anything, if you have the opportunity to present Christ to the person as she's making her last journey, I mean, that's
she wasn't necessarily on her last journey, but apparently her sister thought she was in
I have a friend who got all his kids to come to the hospital because his grandma's dying. They're all surrounding her, and I think she flatlined. They're all praying, and the priest got there a little bit late, so he wasn't able to give the last rites. And a few minutes later, they hear this voice saying, "Who are you guys praying for?" It was his mom who ended up living like another 5 or 10 years. And then the last area, or the other areas that I see, and are social media and interpersonal relationships. I mean, the social media stuff right now, I think, is one of the places we see a lot of issues. The Virtue, I think Ed talked to you about Virtues. I think you're all Virtues trained. I'm not worried about Virtues violations on your part. It's more of, I guess I'm Virtues trained too when I lived in the Archdiocese of Washington. The value I saw in it is that it often helps you to see warning signs of what grooming behavior and things like that looks like. And then the final place, sometimes you're going to have responsibilities with respect to employment at the parish. And that's one where I really think it's important to call Ed as director of HR, and he'll call me, and I'll get the right labor and employment attorney, because it's much easier to deal with things if you're papering them ahead of time than trying to solve it afterwards. For instance, we had a parish in the diocese where there were a lot of allowances being made for a certain employee because of some health issues, but then a year into this it became a problem because the person basically couldn't do the job. And but because we had been making accommodations, we were sort of put in a position where it was much more difficult to make any sort of employment decision. And those don't have to be long conversations. A colleague who I go to quite a bit on this, Allison Terpsma, I mean, she's very well versed in this, and just a 5 to 10 minute conversation can help to avoid a lot of heartache. So let me talk about Michigan's child protection law. Oh, sure.
Yeah, that employee thing is difficult. You know, because there's a certain amount of confidentiality
Yeah.
involved with that.
Yep.
And yet you're in a small knit parish,
Yeah.
you know, and people hear different things. And you're really not free to say anything.
Yeah.
And
No.
that can cause some real problems. I mean, we had a case
Yeah.
at St. Thomas where we've had people who left because, you know,
Right.
um,
Yeah, I don't know that there's any solution to any. And the other dynamic that's there is just the sort of the natural desire to love this person as a Christian brother or sister. And so these are, I think you see the limits of the civil law as it comes into contact with our duties as Christians. And I guess my response to that is, if you want to loop us in, and I hope one of the points I wanted to convey at the very beginning is that I'm trying to look at this understanding that you have a pastoral ministry. This is not a corporation. This is, I mean, in the sense that it is, right, because of the way but this is not a business. The business here is the salvation of souls, and those relationships and the things that happen within the context of a parish can affect people and how they relate to the church for the rest of their lives. And so we'll try to really help, we try to be conscious of that when you call us with a question. And how do we walk you through this and try to help you navigate things like you're talking about? Like someone's not doing his or her job, but at the same time, beloved by people in the parish, and they think the parish is doing wrong to the person. And we try to have that in mind, because this isn't a Fortune 500 company where someone's going to just go apply to another. These are families. These are relations in the body of Christ. So
what's being done, I guess, through formation, you hear stories of deacons or clergy or in general just being asked to step into a new role if they have no experience.
Yeah.
And it's kind of tongue-in-cheek, well, you'll figure it out
Yeah.
and on your way. And it just seems like so much more could be done, prevention on the front end.
Yes.
Then, I mean, you're asking them to be HR managers and to be maintenance people and to be, I mean, that corporations have departments over
Right.
these things. And you have a few people.
Right. No, one of the things that I'm hoping to do, and we've been talking about this, is just do some basic HR training, some basic, here are the do's and don'ts. Just so you know enough to know what you don't know,
Right.
and what you do know, and who to call, and when to call. And so I think that there's that aspect. Connected to that is good record keeping. So I know with the schools, one of the things that is one of my sort of long-term projects is how do we, and this is not just schools, it's actually parishes too, how do you keep a personnel record? Because there are certain things that have to be in a personnel record, and if someone wants to, an employee wants to look at that, you have to give that person a right to look at it, and there have to be certain things in it. And so how do we paper that? It's just based, and it's not, I don't think the administrative burden of keeping those things is so high that it's not doable even in a small parish. But people don't even know what they're supposed to be doing. So that, I will say that those are conversations I'm having with Ed and with Monsignor and Margaret Eric. How do we do that? Just to give people a basic comfort level, because people are being, all of a sudden are being asked to deal with the new parish hall project. I mean, like, how do I negotiate that? How do I enter into a contract? And so we're trying to figure out ways to just do little modules of training. Because I think that's very important to help people, just because you are going to be faced with a lot of things. And now with the new parish models, I don't know what that will mean for deacons, but I imagine it's going to mean more administrative responsibilities going forward. And so, yeah, I'm glad you asked that.
But with those added responsibilities come added pay, which is nice.
Yeah, well, yeah, I've heard the pay is great. I hear it's awesome.
Double what you're taking.
Do the wives agree with that?
Yeah.
Before you leave, you'll let us know how to reach you, right?
Oh yeah, I have a bunch of cards, and I will make
Are
sure.
you like, just like on call for the?
Yeah, so yeah, let me tell you. So we have a retainer with the diocese. So just a certain amount, and so that if you call me up, like today, this falls in the retainer. So if I work 100 hours under that general legal services or 5, it's the same. But at some point, it's capped out. And, you know, so typically, the diocese is doing better, but that's part of our service. And so yeah, I'm on call. You can email me, call me. I think my cell number's on there as well. I work out of our Grand Rapids office, but I have an office down here, and I'm not down here as much as I was in the early months of my tenure, just because I was trying to get to know things. And I try not to roll down 131 in the winter if possible. So that's why I chose a spring day to come down. So yeah, exactly.
How'd that work for you?
But yeah, we are on call and we're here to help. And I think you've probably heard lawyers say we'd rather be brought in on the front end than have to clean something up on the back end. It's much easier when we are sort of shaping the narrative and helping to advise you and be able to just say, okay, no, that's not a good idea, that is a good idea, and here's how we can move forward. So let me just, I know we're getting close to time, so just, I think, I do want to talk about the mandatory reporting, especially with the Nassar stuff. I want to just talk about what the requirements are. And you probably, I know you all have the, you have read and know the policy that the diocese has for interactions with minors and things like that, and some of that's touched on in there. But under Michigan's child protection law, mandatory reporters who have reasonable cause to suspect child abuse or neglect shall make immediately by telephone or otherwise an oral report or cause an oral report to be made of the suspected child abuse or neglect to the department, that's the CPS. Within 72 hours after making the oral report, the reporting person shall file a written report. And I can help you with that. I mean, I have made the call with the people who witnessed something and brought it to CPS's attention. Members of the clergy are mandatory reporters. And I've never seen it tested. I mean, the language makes it seem is sort of more pointed towards people in the presbyterate, but I don't think there's any way to get around that it applies to deacons as well. Child abuse means harm or threatened harm to a child's health or welfare that occurs through non-accidental physical or mental injury, sexual abuse, sexual exploitation, or maltreatment by a parent, a legal guardian, or any other person responsible for the child's health or welfare, or by a teacher, a teacher's aide, or a member of the clergy. Child neglect means harm or threatened harm to a child's health or welfare by a parent, legal guardian, or any other person responsible for the child's health or welfare that occurs through either of one or two things: negligent treatment, failure to provide adequate food, clothing, shelter, medical care, or placing a child at an unreasonable risk to the child's health or welfare by failure of the parent, legal guardian, and other person to eliminate that risk when the person is able to do so, has or should have knowledge of the risk. So those are sort of very general catch-alls, and that's one of the reasons too that we err on the side of caution, because what does, going back to reasonable cause to suspect, what is reasonable cause? These things aren't clear. And there are penalties for failure to report. A person who is required by this act to report an instance of suspected child abuse or neglect and fails to do so is civilly liable for the damages proximately caused by the failure. So if you have a suspicion, reasonable suspicion that there's some abuse going on and then more abuse occurs and you didn't step in to report it, you could be civilly liable, and the diocese could also end up incurring that liability. And there are also criminal penalties. Now this kind of goes to the question of confidentiality. There is an exception. Any legally recognized privileged communication, except that between attorney and client, or that made to a member of the clergy in his or her professional character in a confession or similarly confidential communication, is abrogated and shall not constitute grounds for excusing a report. So that's confusing language. It means that normal privileges give way to the requirement to report, except for in the case of attorney-client and the case of this clergy confidentiality. It talks about confession or similarly confidential communication, and that hasn't been defined. So if you, I'm trying to think of an example. If someone came to you and told you that he was abusing his daughter, would that fall into the confidential communication? Gosh, I don't think so.
I think that's the mandatory reporting, isn't it?
Yeah, but there is this gray area, and yeah, but so I would say I don't think so, but I mean there is this gray area of confessions or other confidential information. What if the child comes to you and says, I'm having these issues, and thinks that he or she is confiding in you and that you're not going to tell anyone? I mean, these are difficulties, and if you face it, obviously you're not going to tell me the substance, but we could try to help you walk through that to understand where it falls on that line.
Then let me ask you, since you're there.
Yeah.
If someone tells me that in their past they have attempted to commit suicide, they have anger issues, and they're still dealing with this feeling many, many, many years later,
Yeah.
is that a confidentiality issue? Or is that just, should it arise to be one, or?
I actually like to maybe get the advice of your fellow Deacons, because that's a tough one. I mean, that certainly wouldn't be a mandatory.
They have a plan.
Yeah.
I know that, yeah.
It's certainly not a mandatory reporting requirement unless there was some, I mean, that's for child abuse and for minors. But, yeah, but how you would handle that, I mean, I think that's one of the ways, like, if a person's coming to you, maybe you set the ground rules and say, just so you know, this is not under the sacrament of the sacramental seal of confession, and if there are things you tell me that I'm worried about your welfare as a deacon and for your own good, I may have to share those. I think you can kind of set the stage that way.
I was going to say, it seems like somebody said that, they're trying to find help.
Well, yeah, no, I just was trying to clarify the legal thing
Yeah.
there. I've had some of
I
that
think legally,
experience.
if you tried
Yeah.
personally, you might try to help them.
Yeah. Yeah, but I wouldn't, I don't think it would fall, it doesn't, because that's child abuse neglect is the mandatory.
I have another question. Okay, so we're just, we learn a lot of things, we have to watch out for things and everything. But sometimes something happens and we really don't know who to go to. Like I see something at church, so I mean, okay, so I go to the pastor, but
Yeah.
it's not necessarily his thing because he has to do something else. Or like we're at a meeting with the youth group and something happens, and I tell the person that's in charge of my stuff, but that person really doesn't get thrown to the head and nothing gets done. Or
Yeah.
how do we, do we go back?
I would call, do you know Marina Hentz, who's I would call Marina. I mean, obviously, if it's something that on its face appears to be criminal, I think you should call the police.
Who's Marina?
Marina is the head of the Safe Environment Office for the diocese.
Oh, okay.
She's in the chancery. And she's very good, very diligent. I've worked a lot with her on background checks and things like that. She'd be who I would call. And if you Google her, you can find her. She's on the diocesan website. You know, it's not partly because people are busy. It doesn't get to the right. I mean, it's not even necessarily neglect or a lack of care.
It could be just anything which is a concern or
Yeah.
something that's a little more than a concern, but
Yeah.
you know, but it doesn't get to the person who's putting, you know, things in jeopardy. Or
Yeah, I think
something.
Marina is really the one to call on that, and she will, you know, she can escalate it to me if she needs to. She may, often she'll loop me in and say, what do you think we should do? And sometimes my advice, I mean, if you see something that is obviously criminal, I mean, but if it's the sort of thing, the warning signs that we hear in virtues training,
Yeah.
I think bring it to her attention, because sometimes it's just an awkward human being.
Yeah.
But I'd rather that she know about it, and we can kind of figure out a plan to deal with it. Was there another? Yeah, sure.
I was just gonna say, this is a very different issue, but I think the thing that I run into most commonly is incidents that happen at church, that someone's looking and falling on the ice,
Yeah.
passing out in church, whatever. And just seeing to their well-being
Yeah.
and failing, fill out the incident report.
Yeah.
When, I mean, everything's taken care of,
Right.
they're fine or they're not fine.
Yeah.
Still, the incident report is important for Michigan Catholic Conference.
It is, and
And
it's,
I don't know even if, how many of my brothers even know where they are in their parishes.
Does he have to do it every time?
Anytime there's an
something
incident.
happens?
yeah. And one of the things I will do, you know, after this, I'm going to send links and resources to Deacon Haas and ask him to disseminate to all you, because a lot of these things are on the MCC website. And why is that important? Well, it looks like everything's fine. It looks like it's all going to be, well, everything can be fine, and the person might reach out just for a little help because of an injury, and then 10 months later decide I'm going to actually sue. And if we have, it helps us to have it memorialized, because then we can deal with it.
And you have witnesses.
Witnesses, yeah. And so we have this with the parish right now, where someone fell into a window well, fainted. It was open and obvious. Fainted, fell into the window well. And there's a bishop's fund to help people. I really don't think the parish, the diocese, were liable at all. But then, about 10 months later, we're sued. So it's very helpful just to have that documentation, because it's, you know, memories fade, and it's just good to know. And then the insurance adjuster can get out there and see what's going on, investigate it. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Well, I just know that there have been times where they said, well, did you fill out the incident report? I said, oh.
Right. Yeah. And I'm not trying to add to your burdens, and I appreciate everything you're doing in this ministry of service, this vocational service, but I think it's just a way for us to try to protect the good of the church. And that's not in a way of like saying, oh, we don't want to help people. It's just, the reality is that people sue, and they get mad, and it affects the ability to do the mission of the church. This is a mission diocese, right? And it's not flush with cash, as you know from whatever you're getting. It simply isn't, and so it's important to be able to protect the goods of the church, so that we can continue to do the good the church is called to do.
The bishop came out recently with a policy on no guns in the church.
Yep.
So it makes some little people uncomfortable if somebody does come in and they see them. So, you know, you could get all kinds of situations there.
Yeah.
They say, well, I have concealed carry, so forth. If it hasn't been announced in the church that, you know, this is our policy, and it just seems like there's a lot of potential for a lot of different things to happen.
Well, for sure, anytime there's a gun involved. Has it not been announced in your, I mean, because I know of the policy,
Within our
but,
board.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's a good thing for me
But
to
that's
know.
not consistent, you know, if you
Yeah.
want it clear, it needs to be like at First Congregation Church, where there's a big sign on the
Yeah.
front door that says.
Yeah, I mean, in those situations, if you know that someone has a gun, I think informing the person of the policy, trying not to escalate it and say, you know, next mass, if you're not, and if they have questions, say, you may have a permit, but that we also have a right to determine the rules on our property. You can't, your concealed weapons permit doesn't override the right of the church to
Would
determine.
that apply to police officers?
No, I know, but it
No,
doesn't.
it doesn't.
They have to carry
The
guns.
policy
Yeah, no,
denies
yeah,
that.
they're excluded. Yeah, I think they're excluded both on the policy, and I think also there are probable provisions of statute that allow them. So, let me move, and I'll, you know, we're not gonna get through everything, but just the second piece, I'll just quickly go through parish facilities and then the social media. Diocesan organizations that allow outside organizations or individuals to rent or use facilities for one-time special events need to require those groups to either buy special events insurance through MCC, and I think it's $100. Or if they have their own insurance, you have to make sure that the diocese and the parish are named as additional insurance. That doesn't apply to the weekly Knights of Columbus meeting. It does apply to the Knights of Columbus barbecue, where they're going to be serving alcohol and things like that. And then, so there are different, and I will send this around. This is off the MCC. It kind of gives a list of different things that would fall into the different categories. So something like a wedding or bridal shower, if your parish is allowing that's something that would require special events insurance.
The baptism party.
Yeah, the baptism party would. But something that may be endorsed by the parish that may or may not require it would be something like Alcoholics Anonymous, Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts. I mean, there's a little bit of a gray area. Things that are sponsored by the parish, let's say the parish play, yeah, I think funeral luncheon probably would be fine. But you know, is it a baptism party? I mean, that probably not. I think that would be fine. Things that like one of the clubs, like the ushers groups or the ladies guild or something like that. If that's a sponsored club, that doesn't need a special event permit. But this is one place you can help your pastors too, because when you were talking about what we don't know, and you know, we're training priests to be fathers, not to be risk sort of assessors. And then let me just close briefly talking about some of the social media stuff, and I think Ed touched on this as well. But and I've even noticed since I've taken over this role that we have to be careful what we're posting on Twitter and Facebook and on blogs and things like that, because we have a public role for the church. And anything we put up there, even if it's only to our friends, really is public. A picture can be taken, and all of a sudden it can be in the Kalamazoo Gazette. I don't know if they still have a print version.
Yeah, they do.
They do. Okay, Grand Rapids. The Grand Rapids Press has, I think, 3 a week. So anything that you put up there, assume that it could end up on MLive or in a paper. That doesn't mean you shouldn't be bold about the gospel and things like that. But it's just, I think, just being prudent. And one of the things that I told the teachers, and I will send this, I tried to print out a bunch of copies, but the printer didn't work. The way you communicate, especially with minors, social media offers another avenue of communication, and you have to be very careful about that. There are obviously going to be contexts where you need to minister to a minor without the parents knowing everything that you're talking about, right? But very helpful if you're first of all, if you can avoid texting minors, do it. But texting and including parents, emailing including parents, so it's always above board, and so those communication communications are transparent in a way, and that you're not putting your, it really isn't, it's less a concern, oh, you're going to do something untoward or inappropriate, but that you might be accused of it. You put yourself in a situation that just could create scandal and harm your ability to do your mission. So, yeah.
Are we able to use automated services so like for instance, of course Facebook and Twitter do it chiefly, but also the email services, they do it the opt-in feature. And so like as an administrator, I could add a person to the group, but they could also join the group on their own.
Yeah.
Are we allowed to have environments like that where the kids are just able to join, or do we have to be the ones that decide who gets in, who doesn't?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've never really thought that one through. My advice would be that if you're doing something like that, that you're doing it through like an official parish email address. I mean, that's one of the pieces of advice I give to the teachers, that if you're communicating with students, you do it in official channels. So if you have a group like that, I think you should have an official parish Facebook page and be the administrator of that page. I don't think you should do it in your personal. I mean, your own Facebook account will have to be linked with that, but that the request to join and things will be going to the group and not to you personally.
As you're talking about, hours that you're going to be spending working on projects, I think a lot of parishes are getting into it now.
Yeah.
And so it might be helpful for them to understand, that they have the ability to approve posts before they're put up.
Yeah.
Like that's one thing, for instance, like if you just have, some parishes don't do that.
Right.
So a pervert could go online and just start typing something in a parish, and the kids read it all of a sudden and are curious.
Right.
So I think it would be helpful if we had some kind of guideline.
Okay, I can work on that.
Here's things you can do to protect it.
Yeah.
So.
And I think the other thing I always like to tell people, and maybe this won't, I think often with the teachers who are 20-somethings, they're sort of surprised, but not everyone's on Facebook or Twitter, and remember that. Like, we're just having this discussion, and we're trying to start a bookstore up in Grand Rapids, kind of like Noon's shop here. And one of the things we discussed at a recent board meeting is just recognizing not everyone is on those social media platforms, and to use email and to get the word out the old-fashioned way, through phones and through flyers and things like that. So I kept you too long. I'm sure there's more we can talk about. I don't know if there are questions as we wrap up, but I'll stick around too, and I'm happy to discuss. And I'll put out some of my cards. And I will make sure that with Deacon Haas I get more information out to you.
Bye, Phil. It was nice.
Feel free to take a donut.